Hello everyone, hope you're all well and fine. This is not a continuation of the previous lecture of oral ulcerative vesicular bullous lesions. The lecture has concluded with two parts of the oral ulcerative vesicular bullous lesions that have been uploaded already. This is just a supplementary uh, lecture um, where we are attempting to rectify certain difficulties that have been that our students have been facing previously in certain areas of the topic. So the outcome of this particular uh, lecture is to give a perspective or an idea as to how to create uh, flow charts and tables for diagnosis and treatment plan based on case scenario. Now, this is going to predominantly be helpful in terms of your clinical aspect, where you form a systemic and a sequential approach uh, to formulating a diagnosis and uh, you know formulating differential diagnosis for complex oral diseases, and also in such conditions formulating a treatment plan which has multiple components to it. um, we are not going to deal with something that is straightforward treatment plan, simple and straightforward. This is going to be how we are going to approach, or how we are going to deal with a complex treatment plan, and how do you follow it up. So the we are basing this on oral vesiculobullous lesions, and we, depending on your need and review, uh, we intend to continue the same for other important topics too. So to start off with, uh, let me just put forth a case scenario. So you can take it in a clinical perspective, where a male patient aged 34 years has come with a complaint of ulcers in the oral cavity for the past 5 days. History revealed that patient had similar oral ulcers 3 months before. He used over-the-counter mouth cream for relief, and it resolved by itself in 10 to 12 days. So patient gives a chief complaint and history of presenting illness, and there is no relevant medical, social, drug, diet, or dental history, uh, which means there is no significant history or significant findings in it. And extraoral examination disclosed normal features, while intraorally patient demonstrated multiple ulcerations on the buccal and labial mucosa, in which visible ulcers ranging from 3 to 5 millimeter, and which were up to 5 in number, were present. Most of these ulcers had yellow floors with erythematous halo, and patient reported that many of them were painful and tender. Now here you are presented with a scenario. So if you have to take this, and you have to kind of uh, use your imagination to simulate it in your mind as a proper clinical scenario when you come across something like this. So as I said before, we are basing this discussion or lecture on our previous topic, which is oral vesiculobullous disorders. We are not going beyond the scope of that oral vesiculobullous disorders topic. So keeping this in mind, so what are all the uh, you know uh, challenges that you will be faced? So first thing is, patient history has been given, and then the what you find on clinical, that is the clinical features based on your clinical examination, has also been presented to you. So the next step moving forward is to arrive at something like a provisional diagnosis based on the scenario presented to you. and then formulation of a differential diagnosis. Now, having a differential diagnosis is very important in this case, unless we have a clear cut factor that kind of like points to you at a certain direction and says that this could be the probable diagnosis. Like for certain diagnosis, let me give you an example. Like let us say if it is lichen planus, then you have a Wycombe striae, or let us say in certain vesiculobullous disorders you have Nikolsky's sign. There are some key elements that can point you specifically towards a certain diagnosis, but in many cases this key factor uh, um might not be present, might not manifest itself, and you might have to conclude or come to a proper diagnostic diagnosis only after conducting certain investigations. But formulating a provisional diagnosis uh, kind of guides you through, and having a differential diagnosis based on the scenario, because this particular scenario opens up to a large number of options, because these features are shared by a number of clinical conditions. So let's just see how to formulate a differential diagnosis. This is explained as a flow chart here. In this case, as we have seen, the patient has a recurrent ulcer, and which is recurring for the second time, and it is affecting multiple oral sites. So now, based on recurrent ulcers or recurrent episodes of ulcers, how can we formulate a diagnosis? So this is explained in terms of a flow chart. This is how you will come up with a flow chart explaining the differential diagnosis for recurrent ulcers. So to start off with, involving if it is a single ulcer involving the same site, then the possibility is a traumatic ulcer. But that doesn't apply to this case, because as we have said, as we have seen in the scenario, multiple sites are involved. If you go back and see that, you can see that the labial and buccal mucosa, multiple sites are involved, and multiple number also the ulcers. So what are all the conditions that can fit into the scenario? One differential is erythema multiforme, where there are multiple surfaces involved, and also will have ulcerations in these multiple sites. But the thing is that it might adjuvantly have a skin, genital, or eye lesion also. Only thing is, in this case, there was no such finding. Then the next possible diagnosis could be recurrent aphthous stomatitis. In that we have three forms. So we have the minor aphthay, we have the major aphthay, and we have the herpetiform aphthay. So, as we all know, the minor aphthay generally manifests in the non-keratinized mucosa, um, generally ranging somewhere around 5 ulcers, in number, and the size of the diameter of the ulcer is somewhere roughly about 5 millimeter, and not 5 to 7, not more than that. And similarly, major aphthay, they occur in smaller numbers but larger in size, and they are most oftenly noticed in the soft palate area. And then finally we have the herpetiform, uh, herpetiform aphthay, which is the which mimics an herpes infection, but is aphthous ulcer, which is presented similar to that of an viral infection, where you might find multiple ulcers which can have literally like tens, multiples of tens, lot of ulcers in various surfaces of the oral cavity. Sometimes they coalesce to appear like a large ulcer, but further examination, a close inspection and examination can show that there are multiple pinpoint ulcers presented in various surfaces of the oral cavity. Then finally, we have the viral infection. So, viral infection, you have the HSV infection. We saw herpetiform acne. Then we have herpetic stomatitis that can occur in various. They are denoted by different names depending upon on the surface where they manifest. Herpetic stomatitis, herpes labialis when it manifests on the lip area, herpetic gingivitis when the gingiva is involved. So there are various forms of the viral infection that are present, but one key element, there are a lot of other associated factors when it comes to viral infection. One main thing being the prodromal signs, where patient also has symptoms like fever, malaise, and it can be extremely painful. While even after ulcers can be extremely painful, and when we see erythema multiforme, there can be significant amount of bleeding from the ulcers too. So this way, if we take all of these diagnoses so far we have discussed, so I'm just discussing, if we can further elaborate them, and we can include many other diagnoses too into this, like for example, you know as shown in the second, in the second tabular form, where in recurrent, when there is a systemic factor involved, you associated with HIV, then you have cyclic neutropenia, you have Behcet syndrome, when there are other areas involved. But this is specific to this particular case. When we think about it, these are the things that we can come, because there is no any systemic conditions involved. Patient is otherwise very healthy, no factors. So based on the clinical scenario, we have come up with three different differential diagnosis. Now, the provisional diagnosis will be the one which suits the most in this scenario, which could be minor after ulcer, because this kind of fits the the clinical manifestations much more than that of the other diagnosis that have been discussed here. So if you are going to be given a, let us say in an exam point of view, if you are going to be given an, a question asking, please form a few differential diagnosis, or how will you formulate a diagnosis, differential diagnosis based on the current clinical scenario, then you can probably formulate a flow chart like this, where you kind of like differentiate the ulcers. You can also, if depending upon the case scenario, you can change the format of the flow chart accordingly. Let us say, for example, if the scenario did not have a thing like patient just has 5 or 6 ulcers, instead patient has multiple pinpoint ulcers associated with fever or something, then probably your flow chart will have more focused towards the herpetiform type of factors and viral infections, in and around viral infections, and other viral infections could be included into this this flow chart as well. This particular flow chart is based upon the clinical scenario given here. So changes in the flow chart can be made according to the scenario that is presented to you. Now, how is this going to help you in terms of your clinic? Generally, these things are not written down or done, or done on paper. When you come across this in a clinical situation, these are all things that are done inwardly, and is only the the result is manifested in your case sheet and your your case reports. We do not go through this entire ordeal of making a flow chart or anything, but nonetheless, in when there is a significant disorder as a finding, a disease or disorder as a finding, it is very important that along with a provisional diagnosis, there is a need to also label out a differential diagnosis, and what is the and it should be substantiated inside our case sheet with the clinical history and also the uh, findings that as a result of our examination. So moving on, let us say for example, just for the sake of an exam based scenario, you are asked to differentiate various features of disease or various differential diagnosis in a tabular form. So you might be asked, the clinical features of this might be so significant that you might have to you might be asked to differentiate it in a tabular form. So this is one such example for that. So here we have taken recurrent after stomatitis as an example. Now, if you had asked me, uh, would I make the same kind of tabular form for the case itself? No. For the case, I would have included the clinical features of herpes simplex viral infection, recurrent after stomatitis, and probably erythema multiforme. But this is just one such example where how to differentiate between clinical. What are the clinical characteristics that you can make a difference using a tabular column. So here we have shown that the clinical features, specifically the clinical features. So differentiate the clinical features for recurrent aphthous ulcers in a tabular form. Here we have tabulated the three different forms of recurrent aphthous stomatitis, and we have tabulated the clinical features. We have tried and differentiated it based on their clinical features. For example, the peak age of onset, where it happens in the second decade for predominantly in minor aphthous, and major it is seen in the first and second decade of the life, and herpetiform in the third decade. And number of ulcers where minor, usually the incidence is between 1 to 5, major 1 to 3, and herpetiform can be anywhere from 5 to 100 in numbers. Size of the ulcers, again minor less than 10 millimeter, and major can be 1 centimeter or more, and herpetiform can be anywhere between 1 to 2 millimeter. They are pinpoint ulcers, very small ulcers, and duration 7 to 14 days for minor, and 2 weeks to 3 months. It persists for 2 weeks to 3 months in major aphthous ulcer, and 7 to 14 days usually for herpetiform. The significant thing with that's a common character for all these three are they are all usually self-limiting. They are not usually that persistent. Yes, major aphthous form takes a little bit of time to heal, depending, it all depends upon the patient's health status. Also, any other systemic cause can significantly influence the healing period of the patient in this case. So then healing with scarring, where you don't have it in minor and herpetiform, whereas some scarring might be present if it persists for for a month or two. And site, specifically minor aphthous ulcer, it is in non-keratinized mucosa, especially in labial and buccal mucosa, dorsum and lateral borders of the tongue. And major, it is in keratinized, non-keratinized mucosa, particularly in the soft palate. And herpetiform, non-keratinized mucosa, but particularly you can see it in the floor of the mouth and the ventral surface of the tongue. So this is an example where you differentiate a particular, or a number of differential on their clinical features in a tabular form. The previous one what we saw was a differential in a flow chart, in the form of a flow chart, whereas here we are doing it in the form of a tabular column. So let us change the scenario a bit for when we move on to the next bit of it. So let us say in the same clinical scenario, we change the personal history, where it has disclosed a period of emotional stress for the past few months, due to stress related to work and very poor dietary habits. And patient has not been have been having a healthy dietary habit or a good diet lifestyle for the past few months due to the stress related to his work. And We are only changing this bit of the personal history. Now, one thing that we do not generally, uh, uh, kind of like jot down when we do a case history in our clinics is that we do not generally go into the social, social diet or, the psychological history unless or until there is a relevance to our our direct relevance to our clinical diagnosis or any findings that we find into the oral cavity. Otherwise we do not generally dwell into the social history, the diet history of the patient. We generally restrict our personal history to oral hygiene and habitual history. We ask about the patient, whether the patient has habits like smoking or tobacco chewing, pan chewing, something like that, and their frequency, duration, and everything. And we ask about oral hygiene, their brushing habits, their other oral hygiene habits, and we generally restrict ourselves to it. If you take the general case sheet format that has been majorly followed, you can see that there are multiple components that are included under a person's personal history. That can also include is social. Social means, here the example is that he lives in a very stressful work environment. uh, Other social histories can be something like a patient who comes from a very poor background, uh, because of which he doesn't have a you know uh, kind of a healthy lifestyle, or he has restrictions to certain healthy lifestyles. Diet uh, dietary habits uh, dietary habits can change. It can be due to poor socioeconomic status. It can also be due to, for example, as in this case scenario, due to stressful work, or they are just careless. They live majorly on fast foods. They don't have a balanced nutritional meal or something like that. And also psychological factors. So a lot of patients, due to the awareness campaigns for mental health and everything, in urban areas, a lot of them are aware. And in terms of distress, now it's also become a policy due to some actions that are being taken by the government, and also in some sectors, that they provide psychological counseling and help in within the workspace, or the institution and everything. But in many other cases, let us say the patient does not have any help, and a lot of them seek help, a lot of them do not seek help as well. And that contributes, to some level contributes in some cases. So let's see how that contributes to in our case while we formulate the treatment plan. So I've already given you a scenario, and we have worked on a differential diagnosis. Now what we have done is we have changed the scenario a little bit, so that we'll see how to formulate a treatment plan, again using a flow chart. So let's say the management of this patient in in a flow chart format. So we have to keep some goals for the treatment. So in this case, first thing is to decrease the symptoms, to reduce the number and size of the ulcers in this patient, because that is his chief complaint, and to increase the duration of disease-free state with minimal adverse effects, because there is recurrence. Patient has come back with recurrence. He has already had this episode and he has come back with recurrence. And one of our the goal of our treatment should be is to prevent recurrence of this, of the same. So here we have come up with the provisional of recurrent after stomatitis minor. Now what I have not included here is, I have not included investigation, flowchart for investigation, or how will you perform an investigation in this patient. We are only focused on differential diagnosis. The reason being that in this case, it is not that we cannot conduct investigations, but in many other cases, we do not conduct investigations straight away, because recurrent after stomatitis, you can perform cytological, histopathological, and you can also conduct hematological investigations for these patients to find any factors associated with it. But we do not delve into that right away, especially for something when you come up with diagnosis such as recurrent after stomatitis. We tend to treat them, and as we go along, we tend to conduct investigations. We'll see how that goes when we see the flow chart of this treatment. So we have come up with a diagnosis of RAS minor. So in this, we are splitting the diagnosis into two parts, two components. One is the pharmacological part and another is the non-pharmacological part. Now remember this treatment plan has been formulated keeping this case scenario. We are not creating a treatment flow chart based on recurrent after stomatitis minor on the whole. We are keeping this particular patient in mind and we are creating a treatment plan. So this is how we'll go about it in a clinic. So immediately, when you see ulcers in the oral cavity, when you see smaller ulcers in the oral cavity, we do not we should not regurgitate what we studied here, and we should not immediately think about any drastic or higher level treatments that we just went through. And for depending upon the severity of the situation. So here we have a situation where there are five ulcers present in the mouth, along the labial and buccal mucosa. And so our treatment plan, and also it is tender, patient complaints of pain, and there is no any associated symptoms along with it other than pain. A patient does not have any fever, does not have any other discomfort. So keeping that in mind, our treatment plan is formulated. So we have a pharmacological component where our aim is to achieve symptomatic relief for the patient. That can be achieved with topical analgesics. So we use something like choline salicylate and cetylconium chloride, which is very commonly available. We can also use lignocaine, topical lignocaine. And one thing I would recommend, especially be it both in your clinical practice and your examination, please do not use the brand names. So choline salicylate is generally comes in the under the brand name Bonjela. There are also other brands which offer the same, but Bonjela being the most probably the populous one, which is available everywhere. So please don't write Bonjela as a we are not supposed to do that. We are supposed to write the generic name of a drug. So either we write choline salicylate or we go with lignocaine, especially when it comes to your exam point of view. Yes, when you write a prescription, it is mandatory that you write the generic name, but in certain cases, we also you can also add a brand name. So just as a guidance for the pharmacist to to supply the medicine for the patient. But predominantly we are supposed to use the generic name, and we can also top it with a topical steroid that can bring down the inflammation. If you notice in the clinical scenario, there is some erythematous halo, there is some erythema, redness, inflammation surrounding the ulcer. So to kind of like tackle that, we can also supplement it with topical steroid, where in this case we can start off with a 0.1% triamcinolone acetonide and ask the patient to apply it at least 5 times a day. Rinse the mouth with something like an antiseptic mouthwash like betadine or chlorhexidine, and then apply this topical steroid and topical analgesic for reducing the inflammation and pain relief. Systemically, what we have to do is what we can do is supplement, give a vitamin supplement to the patient, because in his personal history in the later part we have seen that the patient is not been having has been having a balanced nutritional diet for the past few days, so past few months. So we can probably suggest him a multivitamin capsule to make up for whatever nutritional deficient loss that has happened in this patient. And some studies have shown that especially vitamin B12, despite the fact whether its levels are deficient or in normal level, sometimes vitamin B12 and other antioxidants and supplements like lycopene have shown significance in terms of healing, and preventing recurrence in patients. There are a lot of research based on it. This is just keep in mind, this is just to compensate for the deficiency. And this is the pharmacological aspect. Then the non-pharmacological aspect is based again on his personal history. So again, first thing is, because the patient says that there is a diet issue he's not been taking, probably we can send him for a diet counseling. We can do it ourselves. If the patient is already aware, we just have to reassure him, and we have to we have to emphasis on the importance of a balanced diet and give him the significance of it. Or if the patient is really not aware, or he doesn't have any clue as to what should be his diet pattern or what should he actually do or anything like that, then probably we can send him to a nutritionist, have a diet counseling done, probably formulate a diet plan or something like that to balance out whatever has been lost. One thing we have to remember is that this vitamin supplement, the supplements that we prescribe, is should be considered an interim way of compensating for the lost deficiency. Patient cannot be dependent on a multivitamin, a supplement lifelong. That has to be achieved through a proper diet. This is an interim, uh, provision to just compensate for the previous loss that has happened. And remember one more thing, when we talk about multivitamin, here we have mentioned 30 days is because you cannot take a multivitamin tablet for a single day and expect that all your deficiencies can be leveled out. It takes some time for your body to get its level back. So usually the multivitamin regimen usually follows through at least 2 to 3 months continuously. It all depends upon how much of malnutrition or deficiency has happened in the patient. This is for a normal healthy adult. Let us say if there are other systemic factors involved, let us say patient has, let us say, an hematological condition or something else that contributes, then we have to address that also. But this treatment plan is specific to this person. Is otherwise normal healthy adult, only for past few months he is not been taking care of himself, so we are just trying to compensate for that. Then finally comes the psychological part. Now we have a separate this thing, a chapter dedicated. If you go through your textbooks, there is a psychosomatic disorders, and well, it's a little bit of a gray area, that there are amount of researchers that says that psychological components have a direct impact and can cause ulcers in, or it cannot be a triggering factor in a person for diseases. And there are other studies that say that it's not actually really a fact. But either way, the personal patient's personal history has revealed that he's undergoing some amount of stress and psychological impairment. If you go through his personal, what we have put before, he has been having some work related stress issues. So again, um, if patient is if a patient is aware and if he is already seeking help, all we can do is we can reassure the patient, and we can kind of like educate the patient a little bit and motivate him a little bit. But if the patient shows sign that he's struggling to handle it, then probably we can direct him to psychology or the psychology expert or a psychiatrist to seek counseling or treatment even in certain cases. In this case, we just can help him through psychiatric counseling, where he can get some professional help in terms of sorting out his work related and stress issues, to to get his mental health much better. Following this, what we do is a follow-up or a review. This patient needs to be followed up. Like I told you, we have diagnosed this patient as minor after ulcer. Usually they are self-limiting. They tend to like heal somewhere roughly 10 to 15 days in time. But the thing is that we it will be it's a good practice to get back the patient and follow through. Let us say, for example, the ulcers are persistent, they show no signs of healing. Then we will have to moderate our treatment plan accordingly, which brings me part of the this thing. Let us say we follow up and review the patient, and let us say everything has healed properly. After the patient comes back after 30 days, everything is healed, there is no recurrence, patient feels much better, then no action required. We just ask the patient to follow through with the the diet and the with the balanced diet and mental well-being. But let us say in case there is a recurrence, in case patient comes back again after a month with recurrence, that is patient comes back with ulcers again, especially in this case, then what do we do? Then what we do is we review the history again. We go through clinical examination, all the case history, clinical examination, and the entire protocol again, along with laboratory and histopathological investigations. Probably this time you can include something like a blood investigation to see if there are any significant findings in terms of the you can see it in the blood report, or you can do a histopath, an excisional biopsy of the ulcer, and do a histopathological investigation to see if there are any other factors involved. And finally, we also modify the treatment, because the patient has already been successfully treated, and either it has gone back, or it is persistent, or it is recurred. Let us say with more severity, then you modify the pharmacological management a little bit. Now this time, along with your symptomatic treatment of topical analgesics, you can probably, instead of a topical steroid, you can go for a systemic steroid in severe cases. uh, uh, Systemic steroid, usage of immune modulators such as amloxanax or levimazole, and again supplementing the patient more to make up for any deficiencies. So this modification, or this the kind of uh, making the treatment plan a little stronger comes with as we go on and review the patient. uh, uh, and again we send the patient for follow-up. We follow up the patient to see if it is healing successfully, it is persistent, or is there any recurrence. And based again on the histopath and um, laboratory investigations, we have to rule out other factors, and in case other factors are involved, then we modify the management accordingly. Now this is a like I said before, a treatment plan based on this case scenario. Now one of the common questions that I come across is that, let us say for example, like patient comes with a dental infection. So let's go divide of this topic a little bit. Patient comes with a dental infection. Um, uh, why don't we choose some higher level antibiotics? Why do we always resort to amoxicillin? Or sometimes patient comes with pain. Patient comes with pain, and let us say it is a low to moderate pain. Why should we give brufen? Why not diclofenac? Now these are things based purely upon the clinical condition of the patient. So one example of that is, let us say, let us take pain into consideration. When it is mild to moderate in pain, we choose analgesics uh, that can manage this mild to moderate pain. We can choose something like brufen. We can choose something like piroxicam, mefenamic acid. Whereas let us say it is moderate to severe in pain, then we can move up to diclofenac, or we can go to tramadol, and other drugs that are available. Now, what we have to remember here is these drugs, like for example, Brufen or paracetamol that we use, are sufficient enough to handle a number one. And number one is that, and number two is it also has lesser side effects. And we should also see that the patient does not have any drug allergy, pertaining drug allergy. Patient should not have any pre-existing condition, for example gastritis or peptic ulcer or something which can asthma, which can contradict directly with the drugs we prescribe. So the the choosing of the drug of choice should be purely based on the clinical, the scenario, the diagnosis of the patient. It cannot be, yes, an infection, dental infection. You can effectively treat a dental infection with any broad spectrum antibiotic. It is not necessary that it is not absolute that only amoxicillin can help or clindamycin can help, or you have to seek a cephalosporin for this particular patient. It's there is no absolutes. It is all purely based upon the clinical scenario, and this is the challenging part, because this changes from patient to patient. This changes from in this case scenario, but in clinical, if you take this and put this directly, if you kind of like match it up to a clinic, your clinical practice, this directly uh, uh, differs from patient to patient, because some factors might most of the patient's factors differ from patient to patient. So this has to be kept in mind while you are formulating a treatment plan, especially when it comes to treatment plan. um, uh, Not necessary that you always have to go with a flowchart format or a tabular column format, but we should practice writing down the treatment plan when we do an initial examination, and when we conduct when we come up with a diagnosis. We need to formulate a comprehensive treatment plan and write it down, so that on subsequent visits you don't have to redo the entire thing again. The patient can follow up through the this thing, and when you tabulate it and when you um, write it clearly in a flow, patient will not have it will not be difficult. It will be a very good guidance for the dentist who's going to do the treatment, subsequent treatments, and it will also be a very good an information and this thing for the patient also, to understand what is all required, how much time it will take, and how much is it going to cost, and all these factors involved. So this writing it in a tabulating it and writing it in a flowchart format can help you both in terms of your clinical practice, and as well as your uh, in your exam point of view. So this lecture was created. It's a supplementary lecture. We have completed our topics with the two parts of oral vesicular lesions, and the second part has been uploaded into again into two parts. The main topic has been concluded with the previous term, and this is just a supplementary to clarify some common the difficulties that a lot of them have told us in the past. Now, to come up with all of this, what we need to do basically is that we need to have a basic understanding of the diseases. For that, we need to study. Now, I understand that in a 1 hour lecture, I'll not be able to cover the entire, the entire topic of oral ulcerative vesicular bullous lesion. This is just like like an insight, or like an overall briefing of the condition. It is very important that you go through go back, go to your textbooks, and go through these conditions initially, so that forms a very good foundation for your understanding of the disease. So without a basic understanding of what the disease is, there is no point in dwelling into the recent advancements. The one common thing that I notice these days is, when we talk about some disease, everybody goes to immediately types it on Google and tries to fetch the first. They lot of them do not even verify whether it's a web page, whether it is written by an individual who is who is an kind of like an who is an expert on this topic, who is a professional or a non-professional. They directly read from the web page and try to bring it into this thing. They do not even verify whether it is from a legit scientific source. So how will we know that differentiation? Only when we have a basic understanding of all these diseases. And for that basic understanding, you have to go back and you have to start from the basics. You have to you have to first know the foundation which is there in your will be there in your textbooks. Now the recommended textbooks have already been suggested to you in your student guidebook. It's already there in your student guidebook. Please read your textbooks, then update and top your knowledge with all the scientific journals and articles that are available for you in the library and the webnet source. But foundation is very important for you to, without that understanding of the disease, there is no point in reading about the recent advancements. That is not going to take you anywhere if we do not understand the basics of the disease. So with this, I conclude my conclude this lecture, or or just an insight, I would say. So please give us feedback in terms of you want us to be more elaborate, or is there any specific topic that you need to be covered in this pattern or something like that, so that we can come up with it. This is just an experimental run. We look forward to interacting more during our clinical rounds and uh, discussions, small group discussions that we have. And please put your feedback in the e-portal. Thank you very much.